Hey everyone. Um, this week's discussion is focusing on why it is important to read more than just the abstract, especially when reviewing research articles. I think this is a really important topic, especially in exercise science and dealing with evidence-based practice, because abstracts are often the first thing people read, but they do not always provide enough information to fully understand the quality or implications of the study. Now, personally, I know there have been many times where I have read only the abstract of a research article and not even continuing to read through the entire paper. Now, this usually happens when I'm trying to quickly gather information about a topic related to training, rehab, or exercise programming. Now, as a personal trainer, there is so much fitness information constantly circulating online that sometimes it's tempting to just rely on an abstract or summaries instead of fully reviewing the research itself. For example, I've looked at abstracts discussing resistance training methods, recovery strategies, mobility interventions, and chronic pain management without immediately reading the article. Often the abstract provides a quick conclusion that sounds promising, but after reading the complete study later, I realized there were limitations within the methodology, small sample sizes, or results that were just not as strong as the abstract initially suggested. I think this highlights one of the biggest limitations of abstracts. Their purpose is to provide a concise overview of the study, but because they are brief by design, they cannot fully explain every important aspect of the research. Now, abstracts typically summarize the purpose of the study, the methods used, major findings, and conclusions in only a few paragraphs or even a few hundred words. Now, while this is helpful for quickly identifying relevant research, it leaves out many details that are now necessary for critically evaluating the study. One major limitation is that abstracts usually do not fully explain methodology. In exercise science, methodology is extremely important because the quality of a study often depends on factors such as participant demographics, sample size, intervention duration, exercise intensity, and study controls. For example, an abstract may state that a certain exercise intervention improves strength or reduces pain, but it may not explain whether the participants were trained athletes, sedentary adults, or a clinical population. And those differences matter because results may not apply equally to every population. Now, another limitation is that abstracts often simplify or briefly summarize the results without discussing statistical significance, effect sizes, or limitations. Now, a study might report positive findings in the abstract, but after reading the results and discussion sections, you may discover that the improvements were relatively small or not practically meaningful in real-world settings. I think it is especially important in exercise science because people frequently take research conclusions out of context. Social media is full of fitness influencers or companies promoting exercise methods, supplements, or recovery tools based on selective interpretations of studies. Now, sometimes those claims are based entirely on reading the abstract rather than critically evaluating the entire article. As someone who's working in personal training, I have realized how important it is to understand not only what a study concluded, but also how the study was conducted. For example, if I'm considering incorporating a new recovery technique or corrective exercise strategy into a client's program, I want to know whether the intervention was supported by high-quality evidence and whether the study population resembles the clients I actually work with. Now, at the same time, I do think abstracts serve an important purpose in the academic research. Their main purpose is to provide readers with a quick overview of the study so they can determine whether the article is relevant to their interests or their research questions. Abstracts are extremely useful for narrowing down sources when searching on databases like PubMed or Google Scholar because they save researchers time and help identify potentially valuable studies. Now, in many ways, abstracts act as a screening tool. Researchers, clinicians, and students often review dozens or even hundreds of abstracts before deciding which articles deserve a more detailed review. Without abstracts, navigating large amounts of scientific literature would become more difficult and time-consuming. However, while abstracts are useful starting points, they should not replace full critical analysis of the article itself. Reading the complete study allows for readers to evaluate the methodology, understand the context of the findings, identify limitations, and determine whether the conclusions are supported by the evidence presented. Now, I also think there are strategies that can help make reading full research articles feel less overwhelming, especially considering how time-consuming academic reading can be. One strategy I have found helpful is not trying to read every article completely from beginning to an end in a single sitting. Instead, I think it's more effective, at least for myself, to approach articles almost in sections. For example, I usually start by reading the abstract first to determine the relevance, then move to the introduction and conclusion to understand the purpose and the major takeaways for the study. After that, I focus more carefully on the methodology and the results section, because those areas help determine the quality and applicability of the research. Now, another helpful strategy is learning to identify key information instead of trying to memorize every detail. In exercise science research, I think some of the most important factors to evaluate are going to be sample size, participant characteristics, exercise intervention details, duration of the study, and outcome measurements. Now, I also think it's helpful to compare multiple studies on the same topic instead of relying on one single article. One study alone rarely provides enough evidence to completely support a training method or an intervention. Now, looking at systematic reviews and meta-analyses can also help provide a broader understanding of the evidence available. Now, finally, I believe developing strong research literacy skills is becoming increasingly important in exercise science because evidence-based practice is going to depend on the ability to critically evaluate research rather than simply accepting conclusions at face value. Now, whether working in personal training, rehabilitation, athletic performance, or even cardiac rehabilitation, professionals need to understand how to interpret research in order to make safe and effective decisions for their clients and their patients. Overall, abstracts are valuable tools because they provide concise summaries of research studies and help readers identify relevant articles efficiently. However, they also have significant limitations because they cannot fully explain the methodology, results, limitations, or practical implications of a study. Reading the complete article allows for exercise professionals to think more critically, evaluate the quality of evidence, and apply research findings more effectively within real-world settings.